Welcome to the D2D podcast. My name is John Frampton. I'm filling in for the man himself, Sam Taggart. I was able to choose. Sam asked me, he said, hey, John, whoever you want to pick, get them, interview them, try to give some influence back to the industry. So everybody I could think of, I'm an old dog. And I was
Salty.
like everyone I could think of, John Taylor was the first person that came to mind for a number of reasons. But John, first of all, thank you for coming on.
Yeah,
appreciate
thanks for having me, dude.
This is the first time you and I have been in a formal, setting like this.
Yeah, anytime with you is good time. So happy to be here.
So you notice I made a wardrobe change.
I saw
before.
that. Yeah, the Brady shouts.
If you follow John Taylor on Instagram, he is a massive Tom Brady fan.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
I am a recovering Peyton Manning fan myself.
Yeah.
I was on
Long
team.
road.
I was on. Oh my gosh, I was on Team Peyton the whole time. I was hating Tom Brady. He's got too much to give.
Yeah, no. There's two GOATs in football. There's the first half of Tom Brady's career, and then the second half of Tom Brady's
You're
career.
that big of a fan.
It's the numbers.
It does. Yeah, it doesn't.
Actually,
it's incredibly hard to argue.
Yeah, for sure.
My wife's little brother's been. We were battling back and forth. He was like 12, and he was Tom Brady's the best. I'm like Peyton Manning is smarter. He's going off on Peyton. And Tom, he kind of took it to him. 7 Super Bowls, different teams, the whole thing. Is there 7? That's not bad. All right, so listen, the reason I asked John to jump on this podcast, and if you're cool with it, we're just going to kind of jump into a little bit of the history. Damn. We don't know each other too well. We know of each other. My sister called me one day, and she's like, hey, I just bought pest control from this guy. And she's like, Johnny, I'm known as John, I'm the youngest of 7. And she's like, he reminded me so much of you, and he was so persistent. And tell me the story again. I mean, it's pretty incredible. So for all you out there that are new to knocking doors, there's the old dogs like myself, and there's a bunch of guys we could talk about: Jeremy Pixton, Casey Baugh, Bodie.
Legends.
Just legends, right?
Yeah, for sure.
By the way, I think Jeremy Pixton is the greatest of all time, in my opinion. Had he kept going, the guy was insane, but it meant a lot with my sister.
My time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I don't know if you were born quite yet.
Probably born.
But when my sister called me, she spoke of you in such a, and of course I'm a little competitive. I'm just like, I'm sure it wasn't that good. And then you and I met a couple years ago. Tell the story. It's incredible.
Yeah, so we're both Davis County guys.
Davis County's representing.
Davis Dart, Viewmont Viking. So this is in 2016. I started out at Vivint. My first year was in alarms. The next year I wanted to stay in Utah because I was getting married. And it was just different back then. So I was doing pest control in Utah. I was knocking a neighborhood in my home city of Kaysville, and I knocked on this door. I talked to her, your sister. I didn't know it was your sister, obviously, but I do know your guys' cousin, or so your nephew, Evan. Evan, who's a total stud.
Great guy.
I don't know if we'd made the connection then, but anyways, she was like, okay, cool, like my husband's in the shower, the classic, right? But like I think he actually was in the shower. She's like, come back in like 20, like this all sounds good, like come back in 20. I'm like, okay, cool. So I think I go sell another person. I come back, and as I'm walking up to the door, there's another sales rep leaving who saw me knocking and was like, oh yeah, dude, I just signed him up. And I'm like, absolutely not.
Comes into your turf, takes over.
He saw me. The thing is when I was leaving too, that's as I'm thinking back on the story, I was like, oh yeah, I told him I had a call back there. So like I was leaving the door, and I'm like, oh yeah, I just talked to them. Like I'm gonna check back in. Good to see you, bro. Like I try to be abundant. Like, cool. Like I've knocked this area. Like you go knock. Anyway, so
there's an unwritten code that we just know. It's like, hey,
don't undercut.
Respect it.
Yeah. So
he didn't.
No. So I was immediately pissed. So I knock on the door. I'm like, hey, look, I know you guys just signed up. Like I don't care what it costs me. Like I'm gonna sign you up. I want to win, right? And that was what it was to me. Like, hey, look, like, whatever we got to do to get you guys signed up. Like, that guy was a tool. He wasn't cool to me, so, like, let's make this happen. And then I hung out with your sister and her husband for a bit, and we got the deal done. And I went back and told the guy. I was so hot.
Yeah, the way she described the story, she said, I think the reason you reminded her of me is you were so persistent.
Oh, yeah.
And she's my big sister, so she knows what it was like to grow up with me.
For sure.
And for the record, by the way, the industry, I have 2 older sisters, and it's a shame that they didn't ever jump into this industry because they'd be the best salespeople, period. Yeah, like I'm definitely not the best salesperson as a Frampton. My 2 older sisters would just crush this industry. But yeah, so that was the first time I'd kind of heard about you, and I knew you worked with Bridger Thomas, a dear friend of mine, over at GreenX. He laughs because Bridger is the most entertaining human.
Oh, dude, the funniest, most inappropriate, skinny, fat guy you've ever met. Shout out Bridger.
I tried to get him on this to follow up right after you, and he's currently going through a kidney stone.
Yeah, again, the guy gets more kidney stones than anyone.
He's got to stop drinking so much
kidney
milk.
stones, and then there's like Bridger Thompson stones, and those hurt way worse. They have to.
Oh, it's so awesome. Well, you were there. I heard about you, just your name there. And then I've got nephews that are in this industry.
Yeah.
Spencer sold pest control. My nephew Evan, Jake.
Studs.
Just good, yeah.
Spencer sent me an awesome message like a week ago. Yeah, those guys are awesome.
So I had been kind of dabbling, thinking about getting back in the industry.
Yeah.
And Evan was saying, you've got to meet John Taylor. And so I somewhat reluctant. Was like, all right, I'll go meet him. And so the real reason I wanted to sit down with you, and the reason I'm such a fan, is I went into your office, I sat down, I looked up, just your culture in general, and I sat down with you, and I was so impressed. And I mean this, like, I have been in this industry for a really long time, and it was the first time somebody, how old are you, 27?
28.
28. It was the first time somebody your age, I was taken back, and it reminded me of the people I looked up to, and maybe even the way, I don't know if I carried myself as well as you did, but it reminded me of the way I felt when I was in my prime, when I was out there with teams running, going door to door. You had your purpose was very clear, and I'd love for you to share that with these guys.
For sure.
You had your own culture. You cared about your people, and I remember we talked about, just not screwing over your sales reps. Yeah. And you were telling me at the time, I think you were looking at potentially working with Aptive, which you ended up doing. So you're now currently at Aptive.
Yeah, one of our partners is Aptive. We'll sell with 4 different companies, but the majority is at Aptive. We ended up doing that.
And Grit is your own brand. I was showing you my hat beforehand. I'm like, hey, you inspired. You've got the best gear in the industry.
The hat's sick.
But
but our guys crush it.
My biggest takeaway was you sell lights out, but you care about your people, and you care about the people working with you. And based on my sister's experience, you care about your customers. It's not just...
For sure.
And to find somebody that does the kind of volume you've done in the past, personally selling, but then to build a massive culture the way you have, and I'm going to stop talking here in a second.
No.
That's what I'm hoping that the people on this podcast can jump in and listen to, because you were selling, first of all, local. I mean, you were in your own backyard. Yeah. You grew up, went to Davis High. My sister lives right by Davis Golf Course.
Yeah.
And you still made it happen. You still had the same tenacity you do if you were in another territory. But those are kind of some of the things I want to hit on, and I think these guys can benefit from listening to you.
Love it. Yeah, I got to figure out what I said and did that day we met, because I've never had a bigger fan from one meeting than you. So whatever I did that day, I got to go recreate it.
When I'm recruiting and hiring leaders, I look at them and I say, would I follow them? Would a young John Frampton work for that person? And the entire time I was just like, yes, unequivocally, no doubt, yes, I would work with this guy or for this guy.
Yeah, I was thinking about that because you mentioned that yesterday. So I was thinking about that yesterday on the way up today. And I think people really appreciate authenticity. As when I think about people that I really like and respect, whether it's you, like I've always really enjoyed our interactions. Casey Baugh is like my hero. I really like Matt Rasmussen at Ion. Sam Taggart's this way. I think people, if I'm trying to think about how I want you to perceive me, or I'm trying to control how you feel about me, I want you to think that I'm a certain way. I think it's really hard to be authentic. Yeah. Where if I'm just worried about being kind and cool and nice, and then trying to have impact, I think I'm gonna get what I actually want anyway. So to what you're saying, right? The why of and like you said, I'm a managing partner at Grit Marketing. The why of the Grit is impact. And that's where we make decisions around. That's how we think about things. We want to positively impact as many individuals and families, both current and future, as we can. We want to positively influence our core leadership, and that group grows every year. And then we want to impact the state and the industry. Similar to what Sam's done here, it's incredible. And so as we make decisions about who we work with, what we do, where we go, the goal is impact, and financial impact is certainly a part of that, but it's just a part of it. But I mean, I graduated in finance from BYU. I do back ends. I've done back ends for years, and I, for the first time ever, had someone, it was 2 nights ago, sobbing when I showed him what we were gonna pay him.
Okay, good tears.
Great, dude.
Okay,
like,
all right. I've heard the other type of tears.
I've never had someone cry about like, oh, dude, this is what you're gonna make. You're only gonna make 150. I know you thought you were gonna make 180. Like, I've never had that. He sold a Golden Door. He's a Golden Door winner. He was on the stage yesterday. He's never gotten a back end. He's sold 2 years before, so he's always gotten screwed or whatever. He just never got paid. And we're gonna pay him next Friday like over $200,000 on his back end check.
Jeez.
And and that's not what he's making. He's made a lot more than that. We've as we've paid him throughout, and he was just like, dude, when I went out to area, I drove out to my market. I had to call my girlfriend. She had to Venmo me $20 so that I could put gas in my car to get out and knock a neighborhood. And now, he's gonna in a single day have over $200,000 in his bank account. And so it's those type of stories, right, financially, but then also all the growing. Spencer, your nephew sent me a message like, hey, dude, we worked together for like a year. He's like, but I want you to know that like you've had a ton of impact. And he said a really nice message, dude. Like, that's what it's all about. Yeah. Like money comes, money blows. Like, I'm all about making and investing a ton of money, and that's awesome. But like what we're doing and how we're impacting is like, to what you are saying, is like the purpose of what I want to do and what I want to be. Well,
it's cool because that compliment or that text message came years later, right? You worked with this guy years ago. Mm-hmm. And I agree with you. Those are the best texts ever. And you forget, what meeting you gave or what training you gave that made that kind of impact.
Well, you never know.
Yeah.
Right. Like you just never know. And so I think, right, like speaking about purpose, Jimmy, as we're walking by, Jimmy Rex has been influential. He does We Are the They. He talks about having purpose and not just like, okay, cool, John, what do you want to do with your life? And having like vague ideas about like, I want to have like impact and like I want to make lots of money and like I want to do these like things, but like having like a very clear, Tony Robbins talks about like a mission statement, mm-hmm. where you can articulate it. This is my purpose. And so, right, like mine, as you're talking about purpose, and I'm sure this will be a developing thing, right? But it's like, for me, I talk about, as we're slamming these monsters here at 8 a.m. before Door-to-Door Con, I talk about success is closing the gap between your potential and your performance, right? So where are you currently? What's your potential? Always trying to close that gap between where you could be. And so the purpose of my life, right, as you articulate it, is the purpose of my life is to close the gap between my potential and my performance as I become more like Jesus Christ, who I believe in, as I maximize my role as husband and father, and as I positively impact as many of God's children as possible. And so as I make decisions and work in what I do, right, because I have an articulated, a written purpose, I can make them with the lens of like, okay, is this helping me get to where I actually want to be?
It's funny when you're saying that. I can't stop thinking about, some people might be listening to this podcast thinking like, oh yeah, it's all hunky-dory, they're all,
for sure,
everybody loves everybody, but at the end of the day, it takes a certain level of ego to be able to withstand all this rejection that everybody's getting door to door, right? Sure. And so what I found so fascinating with you is you're still humble, but yet you compete, like you put your head down, you're not going to lose that door. And I look at that person that knocked on the door that sold my sister, and then you went back and got it back. What an opportunity he missed by not connecting with you and it just getting into your network, because clearly you're a league above, which is why you were able to go back and save the deal. But people in this industry have noticed, and it's gotten a lot better. Sam Taggart's done such a good job. Yeah. Danny Pesci, Jake Hess, of bringing everybody together. But it's like, you got to be competitive and win, but you manage to do it in a way where there's so much humility and so much confidence at the same time. It's like, how do you balance that for somebody that's watching this, and you might be brand new to the industry, or if you've been in this thing for 10 years, I'm telling you right now, you can learn from John Taylor. But how do you manage that? Because you do it flawlessly.
Well, that's first off nice of you to say. I think somebody once said, humility isn't thinking less of oneself, it is just thinking less about oneself. Meaning, a lot of times people think like self-abasement, right? Of like, I'm an idiot, I suck, like I'm not great, like is humility. Like, that's not humility. That's just like beating yourself up. To me, humility, and you think about the people that you know who are like the most humble, I think it's just they're not thinking about themselves as much. They think about others, right? You think about, and just in general as you're talking, I've had these conversations with a lot of people in the industry. I think the industry now in 2023, because of the leadership in the last in the last 10 years, is way more abundant than it was when you were coming up through the industry. You're a salty dog, like you said. The OGs, like you go through the Mendez, the Bodys, the Caseys, you, Pessy, whatever, like that group text we're in, like you guys are, like you said, I started in 2015, like you already sold companies by like you guys are OGs, right? And really paved the way. But I do think there was, and I mean, you can't talk about OGs without talking about Todd, but there was, to me, from what I can see of that time, a lot of competitiveness, and I'm super competitive, like you said. I always say I'm not competitive as long as I'm winning. I only get competitive when I start losing. Right? As long as I'm winning, I am chill.
Yeah, that's easy.
Easy. But there does seem to be a lot more of like, there was a finite number of fish in the sea is what it felt like. Like, I'm going to go in and like destroy your company. Where now in 2023, there seems to be abundance of like, dude, you guys are crushing it. These guys are crushing it. Like, we can all win. It's not a zero-sum game. And that's what Casey talks about so much, right? Of just being abundant. Like, we can all win. There is so many fish in the sea in this industry. Solar is amazing. Alarms is great still, right? Like, satellite's great. Pest control keeps crushing it, and we've done really well. But just because you do solar, I don't think that, like, I'm better or worse than you. And I think that's what humility is, right? Like, I'm not better or worse than anyone. Like, I'm not better than anyone. I'm not I'm not worse than anyone. We all have the same worth, and like we can all win.
Well, it's funny you bring up the OGs, because I think that's what was so impressive with you, John. Is every now and again I'll feel like I'm watching the Steph Currys come up, and like the Allen Iversons of the world. Allen Iverson was the man,
childhood hero of
mine. For the longest time, these old dogs that were retired, they were, kind of mocking the young NBA players coming up. But now it's gotten to a point where it's like, Steph Curry's better. He changed the game, and he's better. And that's honestly, it's kind of how I feel when I sat down with you. It was like, oh man, he's on his A game, and you're thinking differently. Because the way I grew up in the industry, it was dog eat dog.
For sure.
Take each other down as much as you can. And I personally never had that mindset. And you talk about Casey quite a bit. He doesn't either.
No.
I found.
No.
But it's cool to see the entire industry, I don't want to say catch up, but that's the way I felt it should be back then. But it's not the way it was.
No.
And
doesn't seem like that.
And I had some incredible people I worked with. Chance Allred, he runs Sunrun now, and he's an old dog, but he
seemed to be doing okay.
He's doing all right. And he said something one time in a meeting. He said, actually I think it was Jared Hallis, but back when I worked with these guys, they said, don't roll in the mud with the pigs.
Yeah.
You both get dirty, but the pigs like it. And so I shouldn't say I wasn't raised in the industry that way. I worked with a company that really preached that. Then they didn't last terribly long.
What was atypical for what the industry was? It seemed to be at the time.
Well, they were kind of changing the industry, but when they went out of business, I think everyone said, "Hey, look, you can't be too nice. You're soft. You're not going to win."
Yeah, you kind of have to be. But it's interesting, right? Like, and what you're saying, it takes a lot of humility. I think it's easy to be like, oh, like I did it the best way, and like that's like the best, and it's like, no, like I think we continually make adjustments as an industry, hopefully as individuals. Like, we're always leveling up. You look at like, and again, I talk about Casey all the time, because I know it's just so funny, right? Of like in 2023, and this is what Casey says: if you're uneducated, you're irresponsible. Because whether it's John Frampton or Casey Baugh or Bodie Gardner or Todd Peterson or Sam Taggart, like, you can learn from all of them. Everyone's like, oh, I would love to have those guys as a mentor. You can. Like, go to Apple Podcasts, type in their name. There's about 15 different, like, just go listen to them, and then you can hear what they think is the most valuable things to share, because that's what people do on podcasts, right? So I think, learning and just adjusting in general from those guys, and just from anyone, takes humility, and is where the industry seems to have shifted in the last 10 years.
Yeah, it's interesting. You bring up, I was talking to somebody the other day about Todd Peterson, and they didn't know who he was. I was like, what? Like, how can you not know who Todd Peterson? Like the guy,
billionaire with a B.
And he changed. I mean, he flipped the industry on its head, and we all owe some sort of homage to him.
Oh, dude,
myself included. But it's interesting to watch how it has evolved since then. You know, he's always been 10 years ahead of everybody else.
Yeah.
And
so yeah, sorry, go ahead.
But what I'm saying, you talk about Casey, and it's like proximity. You know,
sure.
Casey was
really
like smart, put himself
100%,
put himself right. You know, in that situation, he's very humble about it too, saying, "Hey, I intentionally surrounded myself with this guy because he saw, you know, what Todd had to offer, and he tried to offer as much value back." But for the people that are listening right now, because you're gonna have all walks of life listening to this podcast. So let's go to the first year sales rep, or the person that's out there just starting to build a team. They're somewhat, you know, wet behind the ears. What would you say to them as far as how to translate, you know, what they're being taught at their current company? Let's say their current boss is telling them kind of the opposite of what you and I are talking about. You know, how do they adapt and adjust and try to be a force of good in the industry?
Yeah, it's, as I've been thinking about this, because I'm doing the panel here in a bit, and I imagine there's going to be some sort of question on like, cool, like at the Grit, you guys have had of the 35 pest control awards that were given out yesterday, like you guys had 14 of them. The year before we had 11. I did 2 back-to-back. So I think there's, you know, as I've thought about why that is, and you talk about proximity, right? And it's cliche to say, but the cliches are often true. Like all ships rise with the tide, or you become like the 5 people that you surround yourself with. If you're not surrounded by people that you want to be like you're around the wrong people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I don't know how else to say that. Like, if you're looking at your leaders and they don't inspire you, find new leaders. If you're looking at your leaders and you don't think, man, I want to be like him or her, she's the wrong leader, or he's the wrong leader for you. And that's what, when you're talking about Casey and Todd, one of the most impactful.
For the record, I had to compete against these guys for my entire career.
Yeah,
so for me to pay homage, you know, to these guys, like I had to go toe to toe with them my entire career, and I'm grateful for them.
For sure.
They pushed me, and they made me better just competing against them.
Yeah, dude. One of the most impactful things that I've experienced is for sure in the last 12 months was Casey now runs a private equity firm called Sandlot, and they did this summit, and they had a bunch of speakers come up, and the last speaker was Todd. And Casey, for everyone, because this is who Casey is, did an introduction for that person where he reached out to a family member, got like a story from the family member instead of just like a generic, right? But when Casey was introducing Todd, and this was one of the things that was so impactful, he could not get a sentence out. He was sobbing. Not like, dude, emotional. Like I get emotional. Dude, he was crying in front of 500 plus people, right? Like, saying, look,
that's either going to bode well for Casey, or he's going to be like, dude, what are you doing? Tell everybody I cried.
Dude, like,
it's just it shows how authentic he was about it.
Oh, dude,
right?
like, yeah, like he was in front of 500 people doing it. It's like a secret, right? Like, dude, he could not express how grateful he was for Todd, and I get chills thinking about it, right? Like, he said, without, David Nealman and Breeze Airways, there's no Sandlot. Without Todd Peterson, there's no Casey Ball.
Yeah.
And the impact that Todd has had on me and my family, and like, to me, that's aspirational. And then hearing Todd, right, and dude, yeah, I have so much respect for those guys and how they live their lives, from what it seems, and the people they are. And everybody has a story about Todd giving. Like, the story Casey told was he was in LA getting fitted. He was wearing Yeezy slides. The guy that was fitting him was like, oh, those are cool slides. And Todd's like, oh, try them on. And then he tried them on. Then he's like, oh, yeah, just keep them. Right? Like, yeah, just like they're yours. Oh, yeah. And walked out of the store with barefoot. And everyone has a story about that with Todd. So you talk about impact. Like, Casey says he's happiest when he's growing and giving. And those guys have been such examples of, like, there's so much money in the industry. How much are we giving? How much are we impacting?
Man, so just to touch on this, I mean, and this is why hopefully you guys all see why this guy's just incredible. He's just a sponge. He's soaking up knowledge around everyone. And by the way, just for the record, like, he's like the best at knocking doors and and selling, and it's clear why. I mean, I'm over here just captivated, but it's true. I mean, the guy that I ended up finally letting mentor me, and I was so grateful that I let him in, because hindsight, I should have been begging this guy to mentor me.
For sure.
Hayes Barnard is the Good Leap guy, and he actually took me away from Todd back in the day. And I remember looking at Todd and Casey's relationship, and I was like, man, Casey was ahead of his time in the sense that I was too young, and I can teach people more for what I've done wrong in this industry than what I've done right. And I've had a fair
humility.
I've had a fair amount of success in this industry, and I look back, I'm like, man, I took a note out of his book. It's like, man, I should have nestled up to Todd back in the day when I had the opportunity, but my heart and my trust levels were so low that I wouldn't allow it. I mean, even guys like Doug Robinson, he's incredible at what he does. Built an amazing company. Doug and Luke. For me, it was my heart was kind of blocked off. I didn't trust anybody. I thought everybody in the industry was out to get me. And then I met this guy, and he said, he kind of shook me, and he said, no, like, I'm not here to take from you. I'm here to add as much value to your life as I can. I hope you are too. And his principles were the same. And you look at the amount of success these two people have had between Todd and Hayes. Yeah. It's like, he taught me, and I passed it on to my company, love and growth.
Which you guys are crushing.
Thank you.
Love and growth.
But that's kind of our thing, is like love and growth. We coach on love and growth, and we try to do away with fear and greed, which a lot of times I think people, they get sucked into chasing the money.
Yeah.
And so then they start recruiting people to their company based on fear. Hey, where you're at is terrible. You shouldn't be there. And John, you're the exact opposite. I mean, have you actually even worked for Casey?
No.
And that to me is the most surprising part. It's like, you've never even worked there, but you knew, and you were smart enough, just like that kid who tried to sell my sister. He should have been smart enough to find you and say, hey man, I'm sorry I just tried to undercut you, but you're clearly ahead of me in this game. I want to learn from you, even if he doesn't work with you. And most people wouldn't, by the way, so I don't fault him, but you are the opposite. You're going around and you're taking notes out of all these people's books. And I've always said this, like, I'm not a good test taker, but I'm a phenomenal open book test taker. With an unlimited amount of time, sure, I will find those answers. And so to me, it's like, this whole business in general is an open book test. You get to borrow. In fact, you're encouraged to borrow best practices, and I think you've done that to a degree that most, I don't think, is possible. They don't think it's possible.
Something that we talk about a ton is being a sponge, right? Like being a sponge and copy and paste. One of our best reps, that's like his nickname, is if you tell him to do something with his team or the way he runs his program, copy paste. Like, he looks at what's the best practice out there, copy paste. And it's interesting, like, I started at Vivint. I did one like half summer, like, so I wasn't ever really at Vivint. But talking about impact, like, it is crazy. Not all roads lead back to Vivint, but like a lot of the door-to-door industry, right? Like, you started at Vivint, right? Like Sam Taggart started at Vivint. You name it. Like, most of the people that people talk about, like, in one way or the other, which again, all roads lead back to Vivint, all roads lead back to Todd. Not that he's individually impact all these people, but the butterfly effect of, like, look, we're gonna grow and learn and teach people to be great. Those people hopefully will do the same. And you look at what the industry has become. Well,
it's funny, and I'm hoping, if you're listening to this, I'm hoping the message you're getting is, you didn't start out successful. You said you started half a summer. I didn't start out crushing it.
I made $18,000 my first summer. I thought I was the richest guy in the world.
Okay, so you did start out successful in your mind. In your mind,
it's all relative.
But I look back on it, and it's interesting because, we're paying all this homage to Vivint, it's like one company can't hold everybody.
No.
And if that were the case, this wouldn't exist. And like, massive props to Sam for standing up to the man.
For sure.
When Sam started this whole thing, I remember he called me. He was like, hey, do you want to come speak at this event? Was voted best speaker, by the way. No, but he said, I was kind of big time in Sam, like, no, dude, I'm good. Like, and then I found out when Sam was starting the event, they threw a Grant Cardone thing right across the hall from him.
I was thinking
and my heart was just crushed for Sam. Like, oh my gosh, it's going to be over. And so me and a couple other people, we called him, said, hey, not only will we come speak, let's do a podcast. And so I have a lot of respect for the people that stood up and competed against the Vivint's of the world. Jared Chappell, Chance and Jeremy Pixton, when they started Platinum, they just got annihilated for trying to go compete against someone. And they've had massively successful careers, and they've made huge impacts on people like me, or a huge amount of impact on people like me. But I think, when you look at the industry as a whole, I feel like you, of all people that I've come across in the past 5 years at least, you've really started, you understand it on a level that most don't. And that's what I'm hoping to get out of this podcast, is for the first year sales rep to someone who's been in this for 10 years saying, hey, the game has changed. 3-pointers, you need to start practicing your threes.
For sure.
This is the way of the future. And if you want to compete in the NBA, you need to have a 3-pointer. And so I'm hoping that's what they get out of it. But how would you tell somebody to follow in your footsteps, or to do the things you've done to have this amount of success?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And as I think about, and I was thinking about as I was driving up, like what Sam has done for an industry who is so, the way it was fragmented, competitive dog-eat-dog world, where Sam, very like, these are our reps. Like, we're not going to advertise our reps. We're not going to put their last names on things, right? To Sam bringing people up on the big stage, like, look, these are the best reps in the industry. And I think it's just a shift between, scarcity, right? Zero sum, I can only win if you lose.
Yep.
To abundance, right? Of like, no, like 1 + 1 can equal 3. Like, the door-to-door industry can come in, learn, level up, and like, we can all be better because of it. And we can all create more value in the world because of it. So I think it's focusing on the right things with the right people at the right time. And I'm a huge fan of door-to-door. I think everyone should do it. I think, and if you're listening to this podcast, you probably do.
Yeah.
But like the lessons you learn and the growth and just selling, like everything is selling. But I think just to answer your question, right? Like trying to focus on doing the right things for the right reasons with the right people, going back to what we talked about earlier, like who you work with and who you surround yourself with matters. Like it will fundamentally shape who you are and how you think about things, just by what you said of proximity.
Yeah, I could not agree more with you on that. And I think if I were to add anything, I was fortunate enough to have a mentor grab me by the face mask and, shake me a little bit and say, hey, stop, this whole not trusting people thing. I'm not out to get you. You're not worth that much.
Yeah,
it was kind of a humbling thing. But I feel like a lot of people don't know where to go to find that mentor, and that person is right next to them. And it might be their friend. The way I was recruited into the industry was by one of my best friends from high school. We were ultra competitive with each other, and he went out and sold and did well, and he recruited me. He stayed on me, and to this day, John, I'm grateful for the impact that he had on my life.
For sure.
Because I don't know, I would have been successful. I don't think this is the only way to find success. I would have done probably medical sales or something.
For sure.
But he changed the course of my life, potentially my kid's life, because he was persistent. He stayed on me, and he genuinely cared, because he knew, he saw the talent. He's like, hey, you can do this. And this is a friend of mine that we're so competitive with. I didn't think at the time he had too much to teach me, but the second I said yes, I listened and hung on his every word. And man, did he teach me how to work. I had no idea. I had no idea that my work ethic was nowhere near what his was. And so I think we almost have a responsibility to do well in this, not just in this industry, but just in general in life, because you never know who you're going to come across and whose life you're going to make an impact on. So for those of you who don't know
totally
who that mentor is, or those of you who walk up to Sam Taggart or Danny Pesci, or some of these guys, Jake Cass, and hey, will you mentor me? And they just don't have the bandwidth to do it. Don't take it personally, but be persistent. Stay on their hip and ask them, hey, I know you can't, but do you have somebody good in mind?
But on the flip side of that, totally agree. But, and this is what to what you're saying, and I mentioned this earlier, right? Like, everyone's like, oh, dude, I would love to be mentored by Sam Taggart. Or like everyone on this podcast that's listening to this podcast, wouldn't you love to be mentored by Sam Taggart? Or wouldn't you love to be mentored by Ed Millett or Tony Robbins or Tom Brady? They all have a podcast. Literally everyone that I just said has their own podcast that they give their best practices and thoughts that if you were mentored by them, they wouldn't tell you that much different. Everyone wants to be special.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to say, look, I want to be mentored by John Frampton one-on-one. And that's where Casey Boss says, right, like, you're irresponsible in 2023 if you're not educated. Most of the people, right, like Stephen Covey has been a huge mentor of mine. He never knew me. Like,
never met him.
Never met him, right? Like, he never knew me. But he's been a huge mentor of mine because he wrote a book that he put his best practices, and then he wrote other books, and then he gave talks. Ryan Smith, we've played golf and stuff. Like, he doesn't know me personally, but he's had a huge impact on my life. Like, it's not like we're way close, but I've listened to his talks, and I've listened to where he podcasts, and he talks about being on. The point is, right, is like, you don't need these guys to be your mentor one-on-one in person. Go listen to their podcast, literally search their name, be a sponge, and they can become your mentors.
Wow, that's pretty deep. And I don't think a lot of people have viewed it that way. It's more like I'm a fan listening to their podcast as opposed to I'm a mentee. I'm learning. I'm here being educated. A student, yeah. The other thing I think, I mean, tell me what your thoughts on this are, but whenever I give a training or a meeting or just a speaking engagement, like this, for example, I feel like I'm getting more out of this than you are, or than the people that are listening. And I think that's something that a lot of these people don't understand, is like, you don't have to be the best in the industry to offer some decent advice to somebody else that's new.
For sure.
And when you're teaching, you're growing. You might actually get more out of it. So I think a lot of people play small because they don't think they have the resume that you do for them to say something. What would you say to that?
Yeah, it goes back to, like, one, you don't have to do a ton to have really good and smart things to share if you're just a sponge and a learner. For example, even what I'm talking about like being a mentee and like learning and being a student and like the mentors, like that's like, that is just Casey Ball, what he has said. Right? Like, I have a morning routine, I do a whole thing. Like, it's Casey's with a little bit of Ed Millett. Like, the point is you don't have to go and have Ed Millett's experiences to learn the lessons that Ed Millett has learned. To the same level you probably do, but like, you can learn a lot of what Ed Millett has learned by just listening to him and then implementing. Yeah. Like, you don't have to go run and start and fill a company to like learn a lot of the same lessons. To the same level, sure, you won't learn them as well, but like, you can learn a lot of the same things without having done it by just listening, learning, reading from those guys. Like, Elon Musk's book is insane. Like, I'll never do what Elon Musk has done, but I can learn a lot of the same lessons because he like shares them in a book. Yeah. Or there's a book written about him that like goes through a lot of the same lessons. So that's how I think about it. Yeah.
No, it's I think you're making a lot of sense to me anyways, and I'm hoping everyone is listening is getting the same kind of impact on this.
If not, it's been a great conversation between me and you.
I'm having a good time. It's funny when you say that. I instantly think that people they're scared to fail, and so they don't put themselves out there to coach. I mean, I'm kind of an example of this. I've been asked to speak for the last 5 years, quite a bit, and I've done it to people that are good friends of mine. I'll go do it as a favor, and I always walk away thanking them. Like, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to come share my failures. And so my point being is, I think people, they don't want to put themselves out there because they don't want to fail, but failure is where all that growth comes from. And people look at a John Taylor or even an Elon, and it's like, man, they've just been winning their whole life.
Very different,
yeah.
Disclaimer,
I don't know if I should be putting you in the
same sentence as Elon.
Yeah, let's go ahead and separate those two.
Thank you.
But the point being is, like, there's more failure, and that's where the growth comes from. And I think people, it's the opposite in their mind. They think, I'm winning, and that's how I'm growing, and that's how my resume is growing. It's like, no, actually, you were being prepared through all those losses to win. And
totally agree.
I think that's, for me, it's I love how you're paying homage to the people who taught you. What would you say to the experienced manager that doesn't even realize they're not in that like you said, abundance mindset? State. How can they change, or can they change? Can they adapt? Are they just going to be an old dog forever? No,
I think to answer that last question, right? Like, can they change? I have 3 truths that I like to share. The third one is, you can change, you can make adjustments, Like, you can improve. And so the first overwhelming answer to that question is like, yes, like you can get better, you can improve, you can become more abundant. I don't think you have to reinvent the wheel. I don't think you have to pave the way. Like, just start surrounding yourself and being around people, whether it's on podcasts or actually with people, of people who think like that. And naturally, if like you are actually going back to like purpose and what you want, if you actually want to become a more abundant person and you do the things that will make you become more abundant, like you'll become more abundant.
Yeah, it must be something in the Tom Brady fan club. Sterling is a guy I work with, and he gave me this Tom Brady shirt, and he carries himself very much the same you do, and even my business partner Tyler, the guy's incredible, but he's just a student. He just learns and he listens, and he's also a Tom Brady fan.
You have to. I think if you're a learner and you're serious about greatness, like, okay, I want to be great, then you'll naturally just really respect and want to learn from greatness. And Tom Brady, I talk about Tom Brady, Tiger Woods, LeBron James, Cristiano Ronaldo, like all those guys, because greatness isn't doing it really well at a high level for a short period of time. Mm-hmm. It's doing it again and again and again and again. And Tom Brady's in his 20th or whatever season, right? And like still going out, still trying to be better. And the intention is like to compete at the highest level. So I think, whether it's a Tom Brady thing, I think it's probably more just like Serena Williams. Like, you have to respect. If you're serious about greatness, you've got to look at those and be like, oh yeah, like that's incredible.
Yeah, that's it's interesting. I think I've said it's interesting about 50 times on this podcast so far. But you're causing me to think, and as I'm looking around, I'm thinking Sam. You can't not love Sam Taggart. He's just such a good dude. But he's put this on. This is, I think, the 6th year.
Yeah.
And he's putting on a Super Bowl every single year.
Yeah.
And he's inspiring others to do it. And I was with Danny Pesci the other day, and he was saying it was really cool. Like, he's doing something similar. And Danny's like, I'm grateful Sam has paved the way to make this possible. And there's so much room for everybody. And Jake Hess is putting on a huge solar con that's coming up, and he's so here, cool. He's speaking, and Sam's going to speak at his event.
So
and
cool.
It's just like, wow. Like,
which is abundant.
Yeah.
Right? Even that right there, right? Like, Sam not being like, no, dude, I own the space on conferences and door to door.
Yes.
Where it's like, no, dude, like, yeah, dude, you make it bigger. Like, you win, I win. We bring more people in.
That's right.
Abundance.
Yeah, Taylor McCarthy's doing the same thing. He's an OG.
There's so much winning. So, John, you're the man.
Hey.
Thanks for having me on and having the conversation. To what I said earlier, right? Like, I think that you are someone who is incredibly authentic. You're not trying to shape the way that I view you, and so I've always really appreciated our relationship, and have a lot of things that I really respect about you and want to learn from you and others like you in the space. So appreciate you having the conversation with me.
Yes, absolutely. Hey, and listen, to wrap this up, John Taylor, Grit Marketing, legend in the industry. I want to take just a couple seconds and just say, hey, if you're struggling, if you're thinking about, you're having dark thoughts, you're thinking, there's no end in sight for you. I just had there's been 4 people from my high school in the past few years that have taken their life. And I just want to say, surround yourself with people like John Taylor, and know that you're special. You have something to offer. You're loved. Sure. And if you need something, reach out. I'm here. I know John Taylor would take your call.
100%.
But you matter. You're very important. And I'm just hoping to get that message across to anybody who's thinking some dark thoughts. I think most people have had these dark thoughts, creep into their head every now and again. But we love you. John, thank you so much for taking the time to come out.
Appreciate you, John. Slamming the retweet on that. You matter. You're important. You have value. So love to everyone. Thanks, John.
Thank you, buddy.